Snow had fallen the night before, thick and wet, clinging to branches like memory. The wind, cruel and constant, had stripped the land of warmth, leaving only silence broken by the caw of a lone raven overhead. Boone McCrae rode through it all, like a shadow come loose from the earth broad, quiet and burdened. His coat, dark with melted frost, clung to his shoulders, and his breath came slow through a beard frosted at the edges. The plains were whitewashed and blank, but something dark interrupted the drift, a head as shaped as still for an animal, too small for a man. He reined in his horse with a whistle low in his throat, and dismounted with the slow certainty of a man who'd seen too much to rush toward trouble. The wind kicked up the snow as he approached, but the figure didn't move. He crouched beside a tagur, curled into herself, her skin nearly the color of ash. A torn deerskin cloak wrapped her shoulders, and one hand was bare, fingers stiff as carved bone. Her lips were cracked, her braid frayed and frozen to her cheek. She was barely alive, but not gone, not yet. Boone didn't speak. Words were too soft for this kind of cold. He slipped his arms beneath her, lifting her as gently as he could. She stirred, barely, with a sound like a dry reed snapping. One eye opened amber, sharp even through the haze of near-death, and her body tensed in panic. She clawed at him not with strength, but with spirit. He didn't flinch, just pulled her closer, wrapped her tighter in his coat, and turned back toward his horse. She was feather-light, but rigid in his arms. Her breath came in shallow whistles, teeth chattering like dice in a gambler's palm. "They left you here," he muttered, mostly to the wind. "But I won't." Boone rode hard through the morning, his horse sure-footed through the drifts. By the time they reached his ranch, the sun had climbed and dimmed behind a curtain of high, gray clouds. The cabin sat low against a rise, smoke curling from the chimney in thin ribbons. He kicked open the door and carried her inside. The fire was low. He set her near it, fetched more wood, lit the lanterns. He moved without speaking, boots thudding against old timber, the clatter of a kettle filled and placed near the flame. He wrapped her in dry quilts and rubbed her hands with his. The dogs whined at the edge of the room, but didn't come near. They knew enough to wait. She didn't speak. Not that night, nor the next. Her fever broke before dawn on the second day, and her eyes fluttered open with suspicion, as if waking into danger. Boone offered broth in silence. She took it, trembling hands cradling the tin cup. She drank without gratitude, her gaze never leaving his face. He didn't smile, didn't look away either. 4 days, the pattern held. He moved quietly, tended to the ranch, and checked on her with patient steadiness. She remained cautious, perched like a bird, too weary to fly, but too proud to nest. She slept by the fire, never asking why she was spared. On the 5th day, she finally spoke. "They left me to die," she said, voice hoarse as stone against stone. Boone glanced at her over his shoulder, where he stood near the window, sharpening his knife. "Who?" "My own people," she said, eyes distant. "I refused," the elder son spoke against him before the fire circle. Boone said nothing, only turned back to his knife. "Dishonor," she added. "They said I'd cursed the soil, brought sickness with my mouth." Outside wind worried the shutters. Boone set the blade down. "You sick?" he asked. "No," he nodded. That was enough. She expected questions, where she came from, who she was, but Boone asked none. He moved through his days like a man living inside a bruise, careful not to break the skin. But she watched him. She saw how he touched the horses, slow, steady, how he whispered to the soil when he planted, how he stood by the fence at dusk, like he was listening for a voice he no longer heard. One night, a storm came in loud. Thunder cracked over the plains, and rain pelted the roof like nails. She startled in her sleep and reached for something in the dark. Boone stood in the corner, watching. He brought her a lantern. She didn't thank him, but she left it burning. Low through the night, in town they noticed Hetty May, the seamstress with her mouth always moving. Told the sheriff she'd seen Boone ride back with a bundle of rags that looked too slim to be gear. Some kind of wild girl, she whispered. Comanche, I'd bet. Lord help us. The gossip spread like kindling fire. By the time Boone came in for supplies, heads turned. The general store fell quiet. Sheriff Buckland leaned against a barrel, arms crossed. You got company out there, Boone. Boone didn't answer. He just paid for flour and salt and walked out. No one followed him, but the weight of their eyes trailed him all the way home. Back at the ranch, she'd begun moving through the space like she didn't quite believe it was hers. She cleaned dishes, not out of duty, but control. She swept the porch with a worn broom and sat outside long after sunset. Boone found her one morning kneeling in the garden bed, fingers buried in earth. What are you planting? He asked. She didn't look at him. Lavender helps wounds. He watched her fingers work, watched how the soil clung to her wrists. You don't have to do this. I know, she said. He nodded. She paused, eyes still low. You didn't look away, she said. He didn't know how to answer that. Inside, he fixed breakfast while she sat on the porch, the wind playing with her braid. The fire cracked. The dogs slept with their noses tucked beneath their tails. Everything felt still, and yet the air carried something restless beneath its skin. That evening, Boone heard hoofbeats beyond the ridge. He stepped onto the porch and squinted toward the horizon. Dust rose behind a line of riders, 5, maybe 6. They didn't come close, only stood watching from the edge of sight. Boone didn't call to her, but she stepped out beside him anyway, as if she'd felt the shift in the earth. They're from my tribe, she said. They coming for you? No, not yet. He turned toward her, finally meeting her gaze fully. There was a wound there, deep and pulsing, but there was steel too, the kind that bends but does not break. Why'd you plant lavender? He asked. She looked down at her hands, the dirt, the scar across her palm. Because I hoped something might take root here, she whispered. They stood there for a long while, side by side beneath the pink-drenched sky. The wind softened, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, like a memory that refused to fade. Neither of them said a word, but for the first time, she didn't flinch when the wind touched her skin, and Boone, though he didn't smile, stayed, standing beside her long after the cold settled in. The Comanche riders still watched from afar, and the lavender remained tiny, stubborn shoots pushing up from the soil like the beginning of something neither of them yet had the words for. The riders returned with the spring thaw. Snow still clung to the shaded edges of the plains, but the rivers had begun to loosen, and the skies carried the scent of thawing soil and distant smoke. Boone saw them first, dark shapes on the ridge, outlined against a sky gone pale with evening. 6 in all, mounted with quiet ceremony, their faces unreadable. They did not approach, not at once. They waited. Ayanna stood behind him on the porch, silent as a drawn bow. Her hands, which had once trembled from cold, now rested steady on the wooden rail. She watched them without flinching. Do you know them? Boone asked, though he already knew the answer. Her eyes narrowed. The man in front is Nocona, the elder, the same man who had declared her a curse, the same who had sent her to die. In the cold, her defiance a mark against tradition. Now, he returned, bearing judgment once more, cloaked not in rage, but in ritual. There would be no begging, no forgiveness, only terms. The riders descended just before dusk. They dismounted with reverence, not for Boone, but for the land Comanche ways held strong, even here. Nocona stepped forward, his braids silver-streaked, eyes like river stone-cold, and weather-shaped. You are Boone McCrae, he said, voice low but firm, and you have taken something that does not belong to you. Boone didn't move. She was left in the snow. She was given back to the earth, Nocona replied, and you stole her from it. Ayanna stepped beside Boone then, and the elder's gaze shifted. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. I chose to live, she said quietly. You left me with death. We left you with the spirits, Nokona said. But now, the tribe must be restored. Balance demands it. Boone's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. You may return with us, Nokona continued, speaking only to her now. You may keep your name, your place, if you marry within the circle. The son of Red Elk will take you. Your shame will be unspoken, and your bloodline healed. The word marry hung heavy in the air, like smoke that would not rise. Ayana looked away, not at Boone, but toward the garden bed where lavender now bloomed, stubborn and pale. She said nothing. Nokona mounted his horse once more. You have 3 days, he said. Then we return for your answer. The riders disappeared into the dusk, hooves swallowed by the tall grass and hush of coming night. Inside the cabin, silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Boone lit the lanterns. She did not sit. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one beside her hand. You don't owe me anything, he said, echoing words once spoken at the fire. But now they felt heavier. I know, she said. Boone turned toward the window, watching shadows crawl across the horizon. If you go, they won't speak of it again. You'll have place, food, safety, and chains, she added softly. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The fire burned low. One of the dogs whimpered in its sleep. You could stay, Boone said finally. Ayana looked at him, then truly looked, not with fear or defense, but with a quiet grief that cut deeper than rejection. And if I stay, I lose everything that was once mine. I become the girl the white man saved, the one who couldn't find her way home. You are not lost, Boone said, his voice low. Not here. But his words couldn't erase the truth. In the town, whispers had grown teeth. Eddie Mae said she saw Ayana cleaning the porch barefoot, like some servant girl. The preacher warned of keeping pagans beneath one's roof. The sheriff kept his visits brief and left with eyes averted. Boone had never asked her to stay. Not truly, but now, the asking sat in the silence between them, raw and uncertain. On the second night, she began packing at dawn. Boone found her rolling the deerskin cloak, her braid freshly tied. She didn't speak. Her hands moved with grim resolve. He fetched the saddle without a word. The morning she was to leave, the sky turned hard against thin clouds, streaking the sun like old scars. Boone stood by while she tightened the cinch on the horse. His voice came rough. I'll ride with you to the ridge. You don't have to, I know. They rode in silence. The plains whispered all around them, and the wind tugged at her braid like a child begging her not to go. Boone didn't speak, not even when the ridge came into view and the riders appeared once more. But as they crested the last hill, the horse beneath Ayana stumbled. She tried to right it, but its back leg buckled, and she tumbled from the saddle with a cry sharp and sudden. Boone was on the ground before the dust had settled, reaching for her only to see her not hurt by the fall, but by what stood before them. A low growl cut through the morning. A cougar, lean with hunger, its fur ragged from winter, stood 10 yards away. It had been trailing the horses unseen. Now it crouched low in the grass, eyes locked on Ayana, who'd dropped her bow in the fall. One hand reached for it, but the string had snapped. She froze. Boone didn't think. He stepped between them, pulled a burning brand from his saddlebaglet. Hours before, a habit from long rides and lifted it high, flame curling toward the sky. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply moved forward, one heavy step after another, the fire dancing, the cougar growling low. Boone's breath was steady, even as sweat traced down his spine. Go on, he said, voice like thunder, muted by distance. You don't want this fight. The cougar watched him tense, primal, coiled. Then, with a hiss, it turned and vanished into the underbrush. Boone turned, breathing hard, and dropped beside Ayana. Her sleeve was torn, blood seeping from a shallow gash across her arm. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. "You're bleeding. You're shaking," she whispered. His hands, once so sure, trembled slightly against her skin. They rode back without speaking. The Comanche riders never appeared. The ridge was empty. That night, Boone cleaned her wound by lantern light, wrapping it with linen and quiet care. "I can still go," she said. "They'll wait another day." "You could," he said. "But I won't." Boone stopped, looked up. "I choose to stay," she said, voice a whisper barely louder than the flame. "Not because I'm bound, but because you saw me. You didn't turn away. Not when I was starving. Not when they cursed me. Not even when the whole town did." Boone stood, walked to the porch, and leaned against the frame. He looked out toward the field, where the lavender still stood. Behind him, she came to stand close. Her arm brushed his. "I'm not your wife," she said. "I know. I might never be. I still want you here." A pause. Then her fingers slipped into his, not like a promise, but like a thread. In the weeks that followed, the town didn't stop talking, but they talked less. The sheriff nodded when he passed. The preacher found other sins to sermonize, and Hetty May brought fabric, one day, muttering something about decent dresses. Boone never spoke of love, neither did she. But when he built a second garden bed, she filled it with sage. When the storm came and the roof leaked, she was on the ladder beside him. When the horses spooked, she calmed them first. She planted lavender again that summer, not just outside, but in a small clay pot by the window. Years later, folks still asked about the girl Boone saved. Some said she bewitched him. Others said she tamed him. But those who looked close saw it differently. They saw two souls stitched together not by law, nor legend, but by quiet choosing, day after day. And the wind that once carried judgment now carried something softer, a scent of lavender, the hush of soil tilled in trust, and a lesson whispered from porch rail to open sky. Sometimes the truest kind of love isn't the kind you chase. It's the kind you shelter, gently, until it grows roots.